When I asked where my husband was buried, my son said, "You don't need to know." Ellen Harris, widow and mother for 45 years, didn't press him for an answer. Mark, the boy I once walked to school in the rain, spoke as if grief had erased my rights. By morning the cemetery records would be in my hands, along with the legal authority he thought I didn't have. I'd been both wife and mother, now I was the keeper of my own closure. And when I stood by the headstone, Mark finally learned who decided where I said goodbye. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. I couldn't believe the words I just heard. You don't need to know. The fork in Eleanor's hand stilled halfway to her mouth. Her eyes rimmed red from too many sleepless nights and one brutal funeral locked onto her son across the table. Liam didn't flinch. He just kept slicing into his roasted chicken like he hadn't detonated a small bomb between them. "Liam," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice even. "What did you say?" He looked up briefly, his hazel eyes, Frank's eyes, darting past hers. "I said, you don't need to know." The room, warm from the soft afternoon light coming through the kitchen blinds, suddenly felt colder. Eleanor slowly set her fork down on the plate. The faint clink was the only sound in the silence that followed. I want to visit him," she said carefully. "That's all. I want to sit by him, talk to him." Liam reached for the salt shaker, sprinkling it on his potatoes like they were discussing weekend plans instead of her husband's final resting place. "It's done, Mom. It's handled." "Handled," she echoed, disbelief beginning to curdle inside her. "Liam, he was my husband. 40 years, he and I, we built a life together. Her voice cracked. We raised you together." His knife scraped against the plate, metallic and harsh. "I know. Then why won't you tell me where he is?" He finally met her eyes, and when he did, it was like staring at a stranger. His expression was unreadable, blank, maybe even tired. "Because you don't need to know. It won't help anything." She leaned forward now, ignoring the growing pressure in her chest. "Help what?" "Help me grieve. Help me say goodbye to the man I loved." "What the hell does that mean, Liam?" He stood abruptly, the chair legs screeching against the tile. He carried his plate to the sink, turned the water on. The sound drowned out her heartbeat for a moment. "I said," he repeated, his back still to her, "it's better if you don't know." Eleanor rose too, her legs trembling. "You can't just say that and walk away. I'm not some neighbor who dropped off a casserole. I'm your mother." Liam turned off the faucet. Silence fell again. When he finally faced her, his expression had shifted, somehow softer, yet distant. "I'm protecting you." That stopped her cold. "Protecting her? From what?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He just picked up a towel, dried his hands, and walked past her. She didn't follow right away. She stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the familiar sounds of home, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the wall clock. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed faintly down the street. Eleanor had expected grief to come in waves, loss, loneliness, the quiet rearranging of a house now half empty. But not this. Not a riddle in place of closure, not her only son sealing his lips like a gate she wasn't allowed to open. She walked slowly into the living room, sat down on the sofa they'd all once shared for movie nights and lazy Sundays. On the mantel above the fireplace sat Frank's photograph. He was smiling, his arm around her shoulder, his silver hair tousled by the wind. She stared at the photo, the ache growing sharper by the second. What were they keeping from her? Why would Liam, sweet, practical, loyal Liam, suddenly treat her like a liability? And if Frank had made some strange final request, why? Her fingers curled into her lap, her nails dug into her skin, but she barely felt it. There was something she didn't know, something she was never meant to find out. Her eyes narrowed, but she had to. Eleanor's mind raced. What was Liam hiding, and why did he refuse to tell me? The silence between us became unbearable. Was I losing my son too? The morning after their conversation, Eleanor stood at the kitchen sink, clutching her coffee mug like a lifeline. She watched Liam through the window as he walked down the driveway, keys jangling in his hand, heading toward his car. He didn't look back. Eleanor blinked at the sight of his retreating figure, a pit blooming in her stomach. Frank's absence was one thing, but this This coldness from Liam, this refusal to answer the one question she needed most, felt like a second death. She set the mug down and reached into the cabinet above the fridge. Inside was the cedar box Frank had made in his workshop a decade ago, the one where he kept documents, insurance, property deeds, even their old wedding license. Eleanor pulled it down, brushing off a thin layer of dust. She rifled through the contents with trembling fingers. The deed to the cemetery plot, her family's plot, wasn't there. Strange. She could still hear Frank's voice, calm and matter-of-fact. "We'll be buried next to your parents. That's where I belong, with you." He'd said it often enough, always with a hand on her knee or shoulder, always certain. So why wasn't he there now? She closed the box, her pulse ticking in her throat. Later that afternoon, Liam returned from work and walked past her in the hallway without so much as a word. His face was drawn, pale. He looked tired, but not with the kind of tiredness grief brings. This was something else. Tension lived in his shoulders, tight and hunched, as though he were carrying a secret that weighed more than either of them could see. "Liam," she said, standing near the staircase. "He didn't stop. I know he wanted to be in the family plot. You know that too." He paused, just for a second, but didn't turn around. "Don't do this," he said quietly. "I'm not trying to fight. I don't understand. Did something happen? Did he change his mind?" He turned slowly, jaw clenched, eyes hard. "I told you, let it go." And then he went upstairs, leaving her rooted at the base of the steps, the silence settling around her like fog. By evening she couldn't sit still. She picked up the phone and called Ruth. "Ellie," her friend's voice crackled through the line, warm and familiar. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Can I come by? I need to talk to someone." Ruth's house still smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, just like it had when they were PTA moms sharing wine on weeknights and gossip about which teacher was sleeping with which substitute. They sat in the living room now, two women older, warier, one of them with her whole world recently cracked open. Eleanor sipped from the tea Ruth handed her. "Liam's hiding something from me." Ruth's brow furrowed. "About Frank?" She nodded. "I asked where he's buried. He wouldn't tell me." Ruth blinked. "Wouldn't. Said it's better if I don't know. That doesn't make any damn sense." "I know." They sat in silence for a few beats, the weight of the strangeness hanging heavy between them. The soft hum of Ruth's AC unit was the only sound in the room. "You think he cremated him?" Ruth asked gently. "No," Eleanor said immediately. "Frank was clear. He wanted to be in the ground, near my family." "Well," Ruth said, sighing, "maybe Liam's just protecting you from something you don't want to see." Eleanor looked up sharply. "What could I possibly not want to see? A grave?" Ruth hesitated. "You're not just grieving, Ellie. You're raw. Liam's grieving too. Sometimes people make bad choices when they're overwhelmed. But he's not overwhelmed," Eleanor whispered. "He's hiding something." Ruth reached over and squeezed her hand. "Maybe let it lie, just for now. You've been through enough." Eleanor forced a small smile, but her mind was already racing. She wouldn't let it lie. The next morning, she pulled out Frank's laptop from his desk drawer. It hadn't been touched since he passed. Dust clung to the keys like a shroud. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened the screen and pressed the power button. Eleanor decides to investigate further. "I will find out where Frank is buried, no matter what." Liam's behavior was growing more suspicious by the day. The laptop booted up slowly, the screen flickering before the familiar desktop appeared. Eleanor hadn't touched the thing in over a year. Frank had used it mainly to check baseball scores and pay bills. But now every folder felt like a potential doorway. She clicked through documents, bank statements, scanned medical files. Nothing jumped out. No notes, no burial plans, not even an updated will. She closed the lid with a sigh. From the upstairs hallway, she heard Liam's bedroom door shut, quiet but unmistakable. He was home. Again, not a word between them. At dinner that evening they sat across from each other in stiff silence. The scraping of forks against plates was louder than it should have been. Eleanor glanced up. "I was thinking," she said lightly, "we should talk about your father's will. Make sure everything's sorted the way he wanted." Liam didn't look at her. "Everything's fine." "You sure?" "I haven't seen anything in writing. No lawyer, no copies." "I handled it," he said sharper this time. "He gave me instructions." Eleanor blinked. And I'm not part of that? He stood suddenly, leaving half his food untouched. I've got work early. Then he left the room without looking back. The sound of his bedroom door locking echoed louder than any argument. The next morning, Eleanor called St. Helena Cemetery, the same one her parents were buried in, her voice as steady as she could manage. I'm trying to confirm a burial, she told the woman on the other end. My husband, Frank Whitaker. Possibly sometime in the last 2 weeks. A pause. Then, I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't disclose that. You'll have to speak with the next of kin. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. I'm his wife. I understand, but our records list your son Liam Whitaker as the primary contact. He requested privacy. Eleanor hung up without saying goodbye. A thick, invisible wall had risen between her and her son, each brick laid with every deflection, every quiet evasion. The boy who used to run into her arms with scraped knees and long-winded stories had become a stranger with secrets stitched into his silences. She spent the rest of the afternoon in Frank's study, dusting off drawers, opening cabinets, rifling through years of stored-away receipts, maps, a few envelopes of old photographs. She took down the wooden box again, combing through it more methodically this time. Near the bottom was a stack of letters, bundled together with a dry, rotted rubber band. Most were old birthday cards, thank you notes and holiday wishes from long-dead relatives. But in the middle of the stack, folded with deliberate precision, was a single sheet of yellowed paper. She unfolded it. It was a letter written in Frank's handwriting. Not neat, not formal, but unmistakably his. Ellie, if something ever happens and I go first, don't be angry. There are things I never told you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I couldn't trust myself to say them out loud. Some mistakes are buried deeper than bodies. I hope one day you'll understand. Eleanor sat down hard on the edge of the bed. The note wasn't dated, and it didn't explain anything. But it shifted something. Not just grief anymore. Not just confusion. Now there was a shadow creeping in. Frank had been hiding something. Maybe more than one thing. The idea slithered through her chest, chilling the corners of her heart she thought she'd locked up tight. And Liam he knew. Or at least he knew enough to guard the secret like it was flammable. Eleanor stared down at the letter again, rereading the words until they blurred. Her mind twisted through fragments of past conversations, strange silences, unfinished thoughts. Had she missed the sign? She placed the letter gently on the desk, and opened the next drawer, deeper this time, more determined. She wasn't just searching for a grave anymore, she was searching for the truth. Eleanor finds an old letter that may hold the key to understanding what Frank wanted after his death. The letter felt like a punch in the gut. Frank had kept a secret from me, and Liam knew all along. The date on the letter was barely legible, April 2nd, 13 days before Frank died. Eleanor's thumb traced the faded ink, as if touching it might make the words make sense. Ellie, I've asked Liam to handle everything privately. Please don't be upset. It's not because I didn't love you. I did. I do. There are pieces of my past I never knew how to speak aloud. Things I buried, because they hurt too much. But they're real, and they needed to be laid to rest properly. I asked Liam to keep it from you. Not out of distrust, out of love. I hope one day you'll forgive me. Frank. Eleanor stared at the page until her eyes burned. Her chest ached with a slow rising dread. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't grief. This was betrayal. She walked straight to Liam's room, letter in hand. She knocked once, then opened the door. Liam was seated at his desk, startled by her sudden entrance. He saw the letter and froze. You knew, she said, voice flat. He didn't answer. You knew, and you lied to me. I didn't lie, he said quietly. I followed Dad's wishes. You watched me beg. You saw me breaking, and you let me believe it was nothing. Liam stood. It wasn't nothing. Then what was it? Her voice sharp. Because this, she held up the letter. This doesn't explain anything. He hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the floor, then back to her. Dad didn't want you to know where he was buried, he said, because of what's buried with him. She blinked. What does that mean? He exhaled. It's not my story to tell. Well, it sure as hell isn't mine either, But I'm standing in it now. He sat down again, rubbing his forehead. He asked me to bury him in a place called New Hope. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Where's that? South of here. Quiet town. You've never been. Her pulse quickened. Why there? Liam met her gaze reluctantly. Because that's where his other family is. The air drained from the room. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Couldn't. I didn't know either, he continued. Not until last year. He told me after the diagnosis. Said there was a woman before you. They weren't married, but they had a daughter. He stayed in touch. Quietly. Eleanor's hands began to shake. She pressed them to her sides. How long? I don't know. He never just that he made mistakes, and tried to make up for them in his own way. And you buried him with them. Her voice broke. That's where he asked to be. Said he didn't want to be buried somewhere half his truth didn't belong. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. So he lived one life with me, and another in the shadows. No, he loved you. I know he did. Spare me. Liam stepped forward. I kept the promise because he said you didn't need this weight. Eleanor stepped back. You don't get to decide what I can handle. I was trying to protect you. She gave a bitter laugh. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? Liam's face twisted. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of it. But I couldn't go against him. Not when he was dying. She didn't speak. Didn't look at him. I'm sorry, he whispered. She turned away and left the room, her footsteps slow and deliberate. Down the hall, she reached the end and leaned against the wall. Frank had promised her honesty. He had promised no secret, but he'd taken everything sacred. Marriage, death, memory, and rewritten it without her. A second family. A second goodbye. A burial she was never meant to witness. The betrayal wrapped around her ribs like ice. Eleanor feels a wave of betrayal. How could Frank keep this from me? The truth about Frank's past was more than I could bear. How had I not known? The next morning, Eleanor sat in the living room, her fingers locked together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The blinds were drawn, but sunlight leaked through the cracks, throwing sharp lines across the hardwood floor. Her tea had gone cold hours ago. She kept staring at the same photo, Frank on the porch, arm wrapped around her shoulders, a beer in his other hand. Smile easy, eyes bright. The man in that picture had built their home, fathered their child, made Sunday pancakes from scratch, and yet somehow he had belonged to another world, one she hadn't even known existed. She heard Liam's footsteps in the hallway. He hesitated near the door, then came in slowly, his face a blend of guilt and exhaustion. I shouldn't have found out this way, she said, her voice calm, but ragged at the edges. Liam sat across from her. I know. I don't think you do. She finally looked at him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He exhaled. Because he asked me not to, and I gave him my word. That's not good enough, she said flatly. I wasn't trying to hurt you. No, you were trying to protect him. Her jaw tightened. What was he so afraid of? That I'd stop loving him. That I'd embarrass him, in front of his other family. Liam rubbed the back of his neck. He said it wasn't about shame, it was about keeping things from colliding. He wanted the people he loved to stay untouched by what he considered his failures. Eleanor scoffed. Failures? He kept an entire child secret from me. Liam's silence confirmed it. So it's true, she said. He had a daughter? Liam replied, softly. Long before you, he told me her name once. Ava. Said he met her mother when he was still young, way before he knew what commitment even meant. The relationship fell apart. He never talked about it. He just carried it. Eleanor pressed a hand to her temple, her breath unsteady. And all these years he never told me. He said you gave him a second life. A clean slate. He didn't want to dirty it. She flinched. So I was a vacation from his guilt. No. Liam leaned forward, voice low. You were the only Lynn in his life that wasn't tangled up. That's why he couldn't bring this to you. Eleanor stared at the fireplace, the same one Frank had built brick by brick one summer when they couldn't afford a contractor. It had always been a symbol of him, warm, stubborn, dependable. Now it felt like a facade. Did she come to the funeral? Eleanor asked, still not looking at Liam. He nodded. Ava was there. Quiet. Kept to the side. You wouldn't have known. Eleanor's breath caught. I stood 20 feet from her and didn't even know I was looking at Frank's daughter. She didn't want to intrude. No, Eleanor said bitterly. He took care of that for her. Liam leaned back. He really thought he was doing the right thing. For whom? She snapped. Because it wasn't me. Silence wrapped around them again, suffocating in its weight. She stood, walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside, the world carried on, cars passed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Someone mowed a lawn. Everything was normal, but inside her, nothing was. She turned around. I need to go there. Liam stood. Mom, I'm not asking your permission. I need to see it. The town, the people, her. You don't have to. I do. Her voice was firm now. Clear. I need to see the life he kept from me. With my own eyes. She walked past him and headed for the stairs. Mom, Liam said quietly behind her. Be careful. She didn't respond. In her bedroom, she pulled out her suitcase, the small one. She moved with mechanical precision. Clothes, toiletries, charger, nothing more than the essentials. On the dresser, Frank's wristwatch sat untouched, still ticking. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she zipped the suitcase and set it by the door. Eleanor decides to visit the town where Frank's secret family lives. I need to see it for myself. I arrived in the small town feeling like a stranger in my own life. The sign on the highway read, Welcome to New Hope, Est and Eleanor blinked at it as her car passed beneath. The town looked like something preserved in amber, quiet streets, a single traffic light, shop windows dressed in patriotic bunting, and wide porches that hadn't changed in 50 years. She parked outside a modest cafe on Main Street, her hands tight around the steering wheel. For a moment she didn't move. The weight of the past of everything she'd just discovered hung in the car like humidity. When she finally stepped out, the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and hot pavement. She could hear a church bell in the distance. She pulled out the slip of paper Liam had reluctantly given her with the cemetery name written in his careful handwriting, Hollow Pine Memorial. It was tucked away on the edge of town, bordered by pine trees and an old stone wall. Eleanor walked the path slowly, her sandals crunching over gravel, until she found it. The headstone was plain, too plain. Franklin D. Whitaker, 1949, 2025. Eleanor stood there for what felt like hours. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Her heart felt like a room emptied out in a hurry, echoing, stripped bare. All the versions of her Frank seemed to blur in her mind. The one who brought her coffee in bed every Sunday. The one who called her Ella, like a soft secret. The one who had now buried part of himself in a town she'd never even been to, with a woman she'd never met, until now. Eleanor, the voice came from behind her, measured, cautious. She turned. The woman looked to be in her early 60s, short gray hair, linen blouse, eyes that seemed familiar in an unsettling way. I'm Alice, she said gently. Eleanor didn't answer right away. Her mouth was dry. Alice gestured toward the bench near the headstone. Would you sit with me for a minute? Eleanor hesitated, then followed. For a long moment, they sat in silence, both women staring at the same grave for very different reasons. I loved him too, Alice said finally. Eleanor's spine stiffened. Alice didn't seem to notice. He and I met when we were kids. It wasn't just one summer fling or some foolish thing. We had something real. But when he met you, everything changed. Why didn't he tell me? Alice folded her hands. Because he thought he was doing the right thing. He wanted you to have a clean life. A happy one, without the weight of his mistakes. He lied to me for 40 years, Eleanor said, her voice quiet but trembling. I know, Alice said, and he lied to me too. In other ways. Eleanor turned to her. Did he love you? Alice didn't flinch. Yes, but it was different. He and we had Ava, and that changed everything. Eleanor inhaled sharply at the name. She's a good woman, Alice said. You'd like her. Frank was proud of her. He always was. Even when he was silent, Eleanor closed her eyes. Her throat tightened. I kept this, Alice said softly, reaching into her handbag. She unfolded a small photograph and placed it gently into Eleanor's hand. It was Frank younger, smiling at a child, a little girl no more than 6, with long brown curls and a toothy grin that mirrored Liam's childhood photos. He asked me to give this to you, Alice said. He wanted you to see it. He said she deserves to know who her father really was. All of him. Eleanor traced the photo with her finger. I don't know how to carry this, she whispered. You don't have to carry it alone. Eleanor's eyes filled, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Her world had cracked open in ways she couldn't name. She had buried her husband twice now. Once in a casket, and once in truth. And still, one question pressed harder than the rest. Eleanor feels conflicted. What do I tell our daughter? The discovery of another family left me questioning everything I knew about my own. The house felt colder when Eleanor stepped back inside, though the thermostat still blinked 72. The air had shifted. Or maybe she placed her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door and stood in the entryway for a long time, her suitcase untouched behind her, the photograph from Alice still folded in her purse, like it might combust if handled too roughly. Footsteps approached from the kitchen. Sarah. Hey Mom, her daughter said casually, holding a half-eaten apple. You're back early. Eleanor managed a small smile. It was time. Sarah tilted her head. Everything okay? Eleanor nodded too quickly. Sarah studied her for a beat. You look different. I'm just tired. Okay, Sarah said slowly, not pressing further. Dinner's in the fridge. I made roasted chicken. Thanks, Eleanor said, her voice faint. Later that evening, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, poking at the reheated food. Sarah joined her, scrolling on her phone, then setting it down. Where exactly did you go, Mom? Sarah asked, tone casual, but her eyes too sharp. Eleanor hesitated. Just a small town. Somewhere your father used to go before he met me. Sarah raised an eyebrow. For what? He had ties there, Eleanor said. Sarah frowned. Is this about the funeral stuff again? Eleanor didn't answer. Mom, seriously, you've been different since Dad passed. I get it, you're grieving, but you're not letting anyone in, especially me. I'm trying to process everything. You've been avoiding my questions for weeks. I asked where Dad was buried, and you changed the subject. I asked why Liam's being weird, and you shrugged it off. What's going on? Eleanor set down her fork. It's complicated. Then simplify it. Sarah snapped, surprising herself. Eleanor's eyes welled up, but she held steady. There are things about your father I didn't know. Not until recently. Sarah leaned forward. Like what? Eleanor's throat tightened. He had a life before me, a part of him that he never shared. Okay, Sarah said, cautious. And there was someone else. Years ago before we met. Sarah blinked. You mean, like a relationship? Eleanor nodded. Was it serious? Yes. Serious enough that there's someone else. A pause. The air went still. Someone else. Like what? A kid? Eleanor didn't speak. Sarah stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. Are you telling me I have a sibling? That Dad had a secret kid, and you're just now saying I only just found out. Eleanor said quickly. He never told me. Sarah paced. How is that even possible? Because he buried it. Buried everything. And then he died and left us with the pieces. Jesus, Sarah muttered. I thought Liam was acting weird because he was grieving. But he knew, didn't he? Eleanor looked down. I knew something was off. Sarah turned sharply. So you went to find them? This other family? Yes, Eleanor whispered. And there's a woman, Al, and a daughter, Ava. Ava, Sarah repeated. The name seemed foreign and familiar at the same time. And they're just living their lives while we're over here. What? Mourning a man who kept half of himself in hiding. I don't know how to make this right, Eleanor said. I don't even know how to understand it. Sarah shook her head. Why didn't you tell me right away? Because I didn't know what to say. Well, now you have to figure it out. Sarah's voice cracked. Because this It changes everything. Eleanor stood slowly. I know. Sarah looked at her eyes swimming. I don't even know who he was anymore. Neither do I, Eleanor admitted. They stood in silence, mother and daughter separated by a man who was now more puzzle than memory. Eleanor walked into the living room and retrieved the photo from her purse. She unfolded it, looked at Frank's smiling face beside the girl he'd never mentioned. She turned toward the hallway where Sarah had gone. Eleanor decides she must tell Sarah about her father's secret past. She deserves to know the truth. Telling Sarah the truth was harder than I ever imagined, but it had to be done. Eleanor stood in the doorway of Sarah's bedroom, the photo still clutched in her hand. Her daughter sat on the bed with her knees drawn up, scrolling absently through her phone. Eyes distant. Can we talk? Eleanor asked. Sarah didn't look up. I don't know. Can we? Eleanor stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I wasn't trying to protect your father. I was trying to find the words before they became weapons. Sarah tossed the phone to the side and crossed her arms. Too late for that. Eleanor sat down at the edge of the bed, leaving space between them. Her voice came soft but steady. There's a woman. Her name is Alice. They met before he ever knew me. It lasted longer than I think he expected it to. Long enough for a child. Sarah stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. She's grown now. Her name is Ava. I met Alice at the cemetery. Sarah turned sharply. Wait, you've seen the grave? Eleanor nodded once. And you didn't take me. I didn't think you were ready. Sarah stood abruptly, walking to the window. Don't tell me what I'm ready for. You're the one who kept all this locked up like it was your secret to carry. Eleanor looked down. It wasn't mine. Not until he died. And by then, there were only pieces. Sarah's voice shook. He lied to you. He lied to all of us. But you still gave him the benefit of the doubt. I had no choice. Yes, you did, Sarah snapped. You could have told me the second you found out. Instead, you took a road trip to meet the woman he really trusted with the truth. That's not what it was, isn't it? Eleanor stood, matching her daughter's energy but not her anger. He didn't love her more. He didn't trust her more. He just couldn't look me in the eye and tell me he had built a second life before ours even began. And you think that makes it better? No, Eleanor said. It makes it worse. For all of us. Sarah paced in a tight circle, her hands in her hair. So what? He's buried in some random town with people who barely knew him as a husband or a father, while we were left with a flag, a eulogy, and nothing real. He made Liam promise. He asked for silence. And Liam agreed? Sarah's voice cracked. That coward. He thought he was honoring his father's wishes. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. And where does that leave us? Eleanor walked to her, gently placed the photo in her hands. Sarah took it. Reluctantly at first, her eyes scanned the image, her lips parted in a soft gasp. She sat back down. Who is she? She asked after a long beat. Your sister. Sarah flinched at the word. Half-sister. Eleanor said nothing. The room quieted. The photo trembled slightly in Sarah's hand. You knew I wanted answers, and you let me wander around blind, she said, her voice quieter now but laced with hurt. I lost Dad too, not just you. You don't get to keep the fallout to yourself. I was trying to protect you from hating him, Eleanor said. Sarah met her eyes, tearful now. But you didn't protect me from grieving a stranger. Eleanor stepped closer. You're right. I failed you there. Sarah wiped at her face angrily. So what do we do now? Pretend none of this happened? No, Eleanor said. We face it. Together. Sarah looked down at the photograph again. She looks like him. She does, Eleanor said. And a little like you. The edges between them softened. Just a little. They stood in a silence that felt less like a wall and more like a bridge, not yet crossed. I still feel like I don't know who he was, Sarah whispered. Neither do I, Eleanor replied, but we can learn, if you want to. Sarah nodded slowly, the photo still resting in her lap like a fragile truth. Then she looked up, her voice was steady. What happens now? Sarah asks Eleanor. What happens now? The past wasn't done with us yet. It was coming for everything we had left. The attorney's office smelled like printer ink and lemon floor polish. Eleanor sat stiffly on one side of the glass-topped conference table, her purse gripped tightly in her lap. Across from her Sarah leaned forward, elbows planted, eyes sharp and focused. The lawyer, a wiry man named Jasper Klein, with graying temples and a precise way of speaking, tapped a stack of documents into place before sliding them toward them. "So," he said, "your husband's estate was filed under the assumption that he had one legal heir, your son Liam. However," he adjusted his glasses, "if another biological child exists, she may be entitled to a share, possibly more, depending on when the will was last updated." Sarah let out a breath through her nose. "And you're saying there's no mention of this other daughter anywhere in the paperwork?" "None, which complicates things. The courts won't ignore a paternity claim if one is filed, especially not with DNA proof." Eleanor's stomach sank. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "If the daughter Ava, makes a formal claim, it could freeze the estate assets, bank accounts, property deeds, pensions. It could take months to resolve." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. "He said he wanted peace." Sarah scoffed. "He buried a grenade, and now we're sitting in the blast radius." When they left the office, the sun was blinding. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter despite the heat. Back at the house, Sarah paced the kitchen while Eleanor sat motionless at the table. "We have to be proactive," Sarah said. "Get ahead of it. Hire someone. File paperwork. Something." Eleanor's voice was low. "We just lost him." "We didn't lose him," Sarah said, her voice bitter. "He walked away and took half his truth with him. Now we get to clean up what's left." Sarah: "No, I'm not going to stand by while a stranger with our blood walks in and claims pieces of the life we built." Eleanor looked up slowly. "Do you hear yourself? That stranger is still a person, a daughter." Sarah stared back. "So what, do we just let her take what's ours?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "I don't know what's right anymore." Sarah looked away, her jaw tense. Later that night, Eleanor stood alone in the living room, the house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. She reached for the shelf above the fireplace, where Frank's favorite mug still sat, chipped black with faded red lettering that read "One Dad." She ran her finger along the rim. Then she opened the drawer beneath the built-in bookshelf, and pulled out the envelope Ruth had given her weeks ago, the one with the notarized copy of Frank's old will. She skimmed the pages again, praying for some clarity. There was no mention of Ava, or Alice, or anything that hinted at a double life. Nothing but silence. All the way down. Just before midnight, the doorbell rang. Sarah got there first, already pulling her robe tight around her waist. She opened the door. There was no one outside, only an envelope sitting neatly on the welcome mat. Sarah bent down, picked it up, and turned it over. No return address, just one word written in neat, careful script. "Sarah," she called out. "Mom?" Eleanor appeared at the end of the hallway, her face pale. Sarah opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. She read silently, then again. Then she handed it to her mother. Eleanor took it with trembling hands. "I don't want money, I don't want to fight, but I do want my name. I deserve to know what was left behind. And so do you. Ava." Eleanor stared at the note, her breath caught between anger and awe. The world had cracked open once, now it was threatening to split again. Sarah's voice was tight. "She's coming, Mom." Eleanor looked up. "And she's not coming quietly. Eleanor's life is thrown into chaos. Can we even win this fight?" The discovery of a new will changed everything. What was Frank hiding? The manila envelope was thinner than it should have been. Eleanor turned it over in her hands, frowning at the faded label "Safe Deposit. Do not discard" in Frank's handwriting. It had been tucked deep inside a fireproof box in the garage, wedged behind a bundle of tax returns and yellowed car titles. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd gone out to find her garden shears, and stumbled across something far more dangerous. Sarah stood over her shoulder now, watching as Eleanor laid the contents on the dining table. A folded document, crisp, uncreased. Too new. Eleanor opened it carefully. A will. A different one. Notarized. Witnessed. Dated just 8 months before Frank died. Is this? Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. Eleanor scanned the paragraphs. Her hands shook slightly. There it was. Ava Catherine Rowe named explicitly, designated as a partial beneficiary, alongside Eleanor, alongside Liam. Sarah's name wasn't listed at all. Eleanor leaned against the table. He never told me about this. Never said a word. Sarah grabbed the document and read faster. How is this possible? Why would he hide something this? Because he knew what it would do, Eleanor whispered. Sarah's face darkened. To us? Or to him? Eleanor didn't answer. They sat in silence for a long time, the new will between them like a loaded weapon. Outside, wind moved through the oak tree. Inside, everything remained perfectly still, except Eleanor's breathing, now tight and uneven. Sarah finally spoke. This changes everything. If this is valid, she doesn't need to sue. He already gave her part of everything. Eleanor's voice was a whisper. And he kept it from all of us. She gets a third, Sarah said, her tone hardening. That's what it says. A third of the estate. Property, savings, retirement accounts. Everything. She knew. That's why she sent that letter. No, Eleanor said. She didn't know about this. Sarah looked skeptical. Then why show up now? She wanted her name. Eleanor said. Not his money. Sarah crossed her arms. You still believe that? I want to believe something, Eleanor replied, because the alternative is that he lied to every one of us with perfect clarity. They sat for a while longer. The silence now weighted with questions, too dense to speak aloud. Eventually Sarah reached for her phone. I'm calling the lawyer. Eleanor nodded. Tell him we found another will. Sarah stepped into the hallway to make the call, her voice tight, efficient. Eleanor stayed where she was, staring down at the signature at the bottom of the document. Franklin D. Whitaker. Clean, precise, final. She wondered what had gone through his mind when he signed it. Regret? Guilt? False sense of balance? Or had it been love twisted, misdirected? But love all the same. She didn't know anymore. Later that night, the house was quiet again. Eleanor sat on the porch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, Frank's old thermos steaming beside her. Sarah joined her, phone in hand. He's going to file an amendment, submit the new will to probate, but he said we should still meet with Ava's side, try to come to an agreement before this turns into a circus. Eleanor nodded slowly. Did he set a time? Sarah checked her screen. Sunday. In town, a neutral place. Alice will be there too. Eleanor stared out into the dark. We're walking into a room with strangers, and somehow they know more about the man we loved than we do. I don't want to hate her, Sarah said quietly, but I'm still so angry. So am I, Eleanor admitted. But we can't fight a ghost. Sarah sat beside her. Do you think this can be fixed? Eleanor shook her head. I don't know, maybe not fixed. But maybe. They sat in silence, listening to the crickets hum in the yard, the creak of the porch wood beneath them. The door behind them creaked open and Liam stepped outside, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? Eleanor and Sarah both turned. Eleanor looked at her daughter, then back at her son. We found a second will, she said. Liam froze. And we're meeting them, all of them, Sunday. The meeting is set, but Eleanor and Sarah wonder, will this be the beginning of healing, or the end of our family? Let me know when you're ready for section. We're entering the next arc of confrontation and resolution. The decision to accept or reject the inheritance would change our family forever. The morning air was heavy with indecision. Eleanor stirred her coffee in slow, distracted circles, her eyes distant as she sat across from Sarah at the kitchen table. Sunlight bled through the window panes, warming the wood grain beneath their hands, but neither woman reached for comfort. Between them sat the second will, its pages worn from too much handling, its presence as loud as thunder despite the silence in the room. Sarah broke it first. We have to do something with it. Eleanor didn't respond. You can't just sit there and pretend this didn't happen, Sarah pushed. I'm not pretending, Eleanor said softly. I'm trying to imagine what moving forward looks like, with a third less than we thought we had, with a third more than we ever knew about. Eleanor corrected. Sarah stood, began pacing. If we accept this, if we legitimize that will, we're accepting everything he did, everything he kept from us. Eleanor watched her daughter carefully. And if we don't, if we fight it, drag it through court, freeze everything he left behind, what then? Then we protect what's ours, and lose what's left of our peace? Eleanor asked. Of our sanity? Sarah's shoulders dropped. You said it yourself, Eleanor continued. You don't want to hate her. I don't, Sarah admitted. But I don't want to feel like a guest in my own family's legacy either. Eleanor stood and walked slowly to the window, staring out at the backyard where Frank had once spent weekends fixing the fence and muttering at squirrels. You know, when we got married, your father and I had less than $1,000 between us. We bought this house with a loan and a prayer. Everything after that, we built it, brick by brick, mistake by mistake. Sarah turned toward her, and now we're being asked to split it with people who didn't build it. But they are part of it, Eleanor said, whether we like it or not. Sarah looked away, silent. Eleanor sat back down across from her. We can keep fighting the ghost of who we thought he was, or we can try to find out who he really was, together. Sarah bit her lip, eyes glistening. You think we can come out the other side of this? Still a family? I don't know, Eleanor admitted, but I know we can't do it by pretending Ava doesn't exist, or that she didn't matter to him. Sarah slowly pulled the will toward her. You know what's crazy? I'm not even angry about the money. Eleanor gave her a small smile. You're angry because he gave her the truth. Sarah nodded, and he left us with fragments. They sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the background. Okay, Sarah said finally. We meet them. No lawyers, just people. Eleanor took a slow breath. Agreed. Sarah looked up. But I'm not promising forgiveness. Not yet. I'm not asking you to, Eleanor said. I'm just asking you to show up. Sarah stood, grabbed her coat. I'll call the lawyer. Let him know. As she left the room, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of what they'd just agreed to. Not just the legal implications, but the emotional ones, the unraveling of a legacy and the chance to sow something new in its place. She walked into the hallway and picked up the framed photo of Frank that sat on the side table. She studied his smile. It seemed different now, less certain, more haunted. You should have trusted us, she whispered. The door creaked open again. Liam stood in the threshold, uncertain. I heard. Eleanor turned. You're both meeting them? He asked. Yes. He stepped inside slowly. I want to come. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Are you ready for that? Liam nodded. No. But I need to be. She set the photo back down. Sunday then, she said. He swallowed hard. What if it all goes wrong? Eleanor looked at him, at everything he'd kept, and everything he was finally trying to undo. Then we find a way through, she said. She didn't know if that was true, but she hoped it was. The meeting is set, but Eleanor and Sarah wonder, will this be the beginning of healing, or the end of our family? The truth, when it came, was more painful than I could have ever imagined. The church basement smelled faintly of coffee grounds, and old folding chairs had been arranged into a circle too symmetrical for comfort. Eleanor sat between Sarah and Liam, her hands folded in her lap, her fingers twisting the edge of a tissue she hadn't used yet. Across from them sat Alice. Beside her, Eleanor had imagined this moment 1,000 ways, shouting, tears, accusations, doors slammed, but now that it was here, the silence was worse. It stretched thickly between them, like wet rope. Ava was older than Sarah by a few years. She had Frank's brow, his sharp cheekbones, and a quiet steadiness Eleanor recognized and resented. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and though her face betrayed little, her eyes flicked to Eleanor's like a question waiting to be answered. It was Alice who finally spoke. Thank you for coming. Eleanor nodded once. We didn't want this to be a fight. Alice continued. That was never the goal. No? Sarah asked, voice cool. Because it feels like one. Ava turned toward her. You think I want to be here? You sent a letter, Sarah shot back. You knew what it would do. I asked for my name, Ava said, her voice calm but firm. Not his money, not yours, just my name. Silence again. Liam cleared his throat. She didn't know about the second will. None of us did. Ava nodded. Until last week. Alice found it after the lawyer contacted us. Eleanor finally spoke. Did you believe he ever would have told us? Alice looked at her. Honestly, I think he wanted to, but he was afraid. Of what? Sarah asked. Of unraveling everything he built with you. Eleanor's jaw tightened. He unraveled it anyway. I know, Alice said softly. Ava leaned forward. He loved you. I grew up knowing that. Sarah frowned. That doesn't make sense. He never talked about it in a bitter way, Ava said. He talked about you like a place he couldn't go back to, but never stopped missing. Eleanor inhaled shakily. You had years with him, Ava continued. I had holidays. Letter. Every few months, a visit that always ended too soon. I didn't even know what kind of man he was in your home. He was good, Sarah said. Her voice cracked. Or at least I thought he was. Ava looked at her. So did I. For the first time, Eleanor saw it reflected pain, not malice. Ava wasn't here to take anything. She was here to collect what was owed. Understanding, maybe. Truth, definitely. I thought I was angry at you, Eleanor said. But I'm not. I'm angry at him for splitting himself in half and calling it love. Alice's face folded into a sorrowful smile. That's exactly what it was. Sarah looked down. We were planning his retirement, his garden. He was picking out recliners and pretending to worry about cholesterol while carrying all the... Liam added quietly. We weren't enough to make him tell the truth. Eleanor shook her head. No, we were too much, too safe. No one spoke. Eventually the lawyer, neutral, silent until now, handed over a document. A settlement agreement. Pre-drafted. Practical. Ava signed it first, then slid it across. Eleanor took the pen, paused, then signed without looking up. Sarah followed. The paper passed like a truce. When it was done, Alice stood. If it matters, I never hated you. Eleanor stood as well. That matters more than I expected it to. They all shook hands. Awkward, unsure, but real. And then it was done. Eleanor stepped outside first. The cold air stung her lungs. Sarah followed. Liam behind her. They didn't speak for a long while. Finally Sarah said, I still don't know what to feel. Eleanor exhaled. Neither do I. Liam looked back at the church door. Do you think this fixed anything? No, Eleanor said. She looked down at her hands, then up at the gray sky above them. But it stopped it from getting worse. Eleanor and Sarah leave the meeting, unsure if their family can ever truly heal. Just when we thought it was over, something unexpected changed everything. 3 days after the meeting, a small cardboard package arrived at the house. No return address, no stamp, just their name. Whitaker scrawled in familiar handwriting across the top. Eleanor stood in the hallway holding it like a live wire. Liam hovered beside her, uncertain. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. What's that? I don't know, Eleanor said. But it's his. They opened it together at the kitchen table. The same one where arguments had echoed and peace had been tried. Inside, beneath layers of yellowed newspaper, was a slim wooden box. A jewelry case maybe, or a keepsake box. Eleanor undid the Inside was a single envelope, aged but sealed, and a brass key on a thin chain. She turned the envelope over. To L. Only if I'm gone. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Frank's handwriting, slanted and familiar, spilled across the page. She began to read aloud, voice uneven. Ellie, if you're reading this, then I've done what I always feared. I've hurt you, not by what I told you, but by what I never could. I was a coward, Elle. I let time convince me that the truth would destroy the life we built, and so I buried it again and again. But love doesn't erase what came before it. It simply asks to be strong enough to carry it. You were always that strong. I wasn't. I hope somehow you met Ava, that you looked into her face and saw a piece of me, not the part that failed you, but the part that always meant to return to honesty. This key is for the treehouse I built with Liam. There's a box up there. It's yours. I should have given it to you years ago. I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to be the man you thought I was. Forgive me, please, Frank. Eleanor folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest. No one spoke. The silence wasn't empty this time. It was reverent, brimming with the echo of things too late, but still somehow needed. Liam's voice broke it first. Should we go look? They did. The treehouse hadn't been touched in years. Leaves crusted the floorboards. The old ladder groaned beneath their weight. But inside, beneath a loose panel on the wall, was another box. Sarah found it. Inside were photographed letters, birthday cards written but never sent. There was one photo of Eleanor and Sarah at the beach taken decades ago. On the back, Frank had written, "This is the day I knew I had to stay quiet, because happiness this full, I didn't think it could survive the Sarah's hands shook as she passed it to her mother. Eleanor traced the grainy image with her thumb. "He never stopped loving us," she whispered. "But he never stopped loving them either." They sat in the treehouse for a long time, flipping through fragments of a man they only thought they'd known. That night, Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the yard. "I've been thinking," she said. Eleanor looked up from the table. "Let's plant." Eleanor blinked. "What do you mean?" "A tree. A new one. In the backyard. For him, for all of this. Something we can see grow." Eleanor nodded slowly. "A tree. One we take care of," Sarah said. "Not because he was perfect, but because we survived the Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "He'd like that." Sarah smiled faintly. "We'll pick one tomorrow." They didn't hug, didn't say much more, but the space between them no longer felt broken, just different, like a door left ajar. Later that night, Eleanor sat alone on the porch, the key still on its chain around her neck. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace. Not forgiveness, not closure, but roots being replanted. Eleanor and Sarah decide to plant a tree in Frank's honor. "We'll make something beautiful out of this."